Besides today being the Tzayim HaRavi, which we call Shiva Asar Tammuz, it also begins the period of Bein HaMetzarim. The term Bein HaMetzarim comes from the pasuk in Eicha, as we're familiar with, called Reid Fe'er Hisigua Bein HaMetzarim. In the Medrash there in Galef, Eschaftes, says that the Yomim Bein HaMetzarim are Yomei Da'aka, Yomim of Tzara, which are between the two Meitzarim of Shiva Asar Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. Midina the Shulchan Aruch, as is brought in the Mechaber, and we'll in a moment discuss Minig B'nei Ashkenaz al Pi the Ramah, but Midina the Shulchan Aruch, Be'ikr the Yimei Bein HaMetzarim are relevant for three dinim. One is that the Mechaber brings that some have a minig not to be oichel basar and be shoyse yayin from Yud Zayin B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av. That's not mitzad dinei avelos, because an ovel isn't osir b'basar v'yayin. Adarabah we're mashke an ovel yayin, the sugi in Ksubas, the first perek. The reason is because this was the zman of the bittul of the karbonos and the nesachim. And Memela, the Mechaber brings a minig, which we're not noig, that there's a isser of achilas basar from Yud Zayin B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av. That's similar to what's mavur in the Gemara in Bava Basra, where la'achad the Churban, there were those that stopped eating basar. That's one din. The second din that the Shulchan Aruch brings is not an isser, but the lashon of the Mechaber is toivli zoyer, and that's to say shechionu bein HaMetzarim. Again, that's not midinei avelos. The reason is because it's not roi to say shechionu v'kimonu v'gionu lazman hazeh, where this is not a zman of, this is a zman of puranos. And in fact, paradoxically, if something is mechayev ha'teiva meitiv, which means it's a teiva for both the person who possessed it and for others, and there's no bircha shechionu in that case, then it's mutter to make the bracha of ha'teiva meitiv according to many achrim. It's specifically the bracha of shechionu v'kimonu v'gionu lazman hazeh. And the fourth and the third halacha, which is brought in the Mechaber, again in the lashon of tzarech v'zoyer, are in yonim, certain yonim of sakana, where the Mechaber brings at the very end of Siman Tov Kuf Nun Aleph, not to be hilech yichidi midalet shoyis ates shoyis, not to be maked the talmidim, etc. That's what's muskal lahedya in Shulchan Aruch. B'nei Ashkenaz al Pi the Ramah add beyond the din of what's muskal in Shulchan Aruch, that from Yud Zayin B'Tammuz and on, we are noyeg in isser of tispeiris, an isser of taking a haircut, which we did in the Shulchan Aruch doesn't start from Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. And the second thing is that we're noyeg not to be noyeg in noshim. Now, the isser of tispeiris, as opposed to basar v'yayin, shechionu, and the inyanim of sakana, is related to avelos. That's a miktas avelos. However, the Indian of our minig not to be nois and noshim is not midina, and it's not to do with hilchos avelos, it's an Indian. Because really, me'ikar adin, the mitzvah of being nois and isha for someone who wasn't yet mekayim period v'rivya would be doicha than yihugim of avelos. For example, the halacha that we're familiar with, that mishanichnas av, we're not boine a binyan shal simcha, but the base chasnus lebenai, in order to be able to make chasna for a child who hasn't yet been mekayim period v'rivya, is mutter. So really, the mitzvah of nisuin would be doicha. The reason why we have a minig not to be nice and noshim is because it's like Mesam Milsa. Since, like we said, it's his man of Puranos, and it's not his man in which we want to be nice and noshim. So we have 5 dinim to summarize. In Shulchan Aruch, it's mavur l'gabe a minig of achilas basar v'yayin, l'gabe not saying shechionu and benegeh to zihirus of inyanim of sakana. In Bnei Ashkenaz a moisef also nisuin, which is again not to do with avelos but to do with the Mesam Milsa of this man. And then we have the din of tispeiris, which is related to avelos. The shaila which we're going to discuss Be'ez Hashem in this limud is what defines the zman of Bein HaMetzarim. Is it defined by the dates, Yom Yud Zayin B'Tammuz until, and there's a shaila if it's until Yom Tes or until the end of Yom Tes, or it continues into Yom Yud. Perhaps if you have time, we'll get to that shaila. Or is it defined from tainus to tainus? Is it from the tsoyim haravi until the tsoyim hachamishi? One of the nafkiminas that this shaila has, which is already discussed in the Kadmonim, the Chidah, brings that this is already discussed in Kadmonim, is benegea to the laila of Shiva Asa B'Tammuz. L'chura, if we would be done mitzad the dinim of the zman, then kipshuto we would say, although we'll see that's itself a suffix in the Achreinim, that since the Bein HaMetzarim would be defined as from Yom Yud Zayin B'Tammuz until Yom Tisha B'Av, so like any Yom in Din, the Yom begins from the Laila Shel Hashanah, in which case the Nihugim of Yemei Bein HaMetzarim should begin Leil Yud Zayin. Me'idach Gisa, we could say that it depends on the Nihugim of Tzayim. And the Tzayim only begins on the Yom of Yud Zayin. We're not noig with the Tzayim of Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, the same Chumrah as we'll see Be'ez Hashem B'Hemshech of Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippurim, that the Tainus begins what we call Miboid Yom. So Memele, we could possibly suggest two clear tztadim. One is if we did say that the Nihugim of Yemei Ben HaMetzarim depend on Zman, then it would begin like any Zman from the Tchila of Yom Yud Zayin. If it would begin with Tainus, and the shall only begin the next day. What we'll see Be'ezer Hashem is that these two Mahalchim in understanding what the Nihugim of Yemei Ben HaMetzarim depend on is a Machlokes Achreinim. But what we will see as a Chiddush is that within each tzad, we could say the other way too. Meaning, the basic two tzaddim we established were that if Yemei Bein HaMetzarim is defined by Zman, then it should begin Leil Yud Zayin. If it's defined by the Tainus, it should begin B'Shachris. And what we'll see in the Kadmoni HaAchronim is that they made also assumptions, the reverse of that even if we'll understand that the Nihugim of Yemei Bein HaMetzarim depend on Yomim, but there may be a reason why the Nihugim should still only begin on Yom Yud Zayin. And then we'll also see that if it's Tali on Tainus, there's also a Mokum to Mistapik. Will it be by Yom or Balayim? And again, as we said, the Nafkamina is when the Nihugim of the Yemei Bein HaMetzarim begin. But we'll see there's an Afkimina B'Negea if there could be Nisuin, Leil Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, which would have been last night. Could one have still been Misaper last night? And to those of the Sfardim who are Makpid, which the Ashkenaz are not Makpid on this, paradoxically, even though Minig Aramah is always to be Meisif on the Shulchan Aruch, in this we don't take on the Yesh Omer of the Minig of Achilas Basar, but in Eretz Yisrael it's much more widespread, befrat amongst those who are Noeg al Pi, the Yeshiva Samakubalim in Yerushalayim, to be Noeg in Isser of Achilas Basar and Yain already from Shilas B'Tammuz. Does that Isser begin Leil Yud Zayin B'Tammuz or only the next day? So we'll begin with the tshuva of the Chidah in the Tshuvas Chidah and Tshuvas Chaim Shoel. The Chidah discusses the Shaila, and he brings the Shaila actually from a Kadmoin. He says, "Re'isi b'Sefer Chodosh al davar mutar levarech." In the top right of the Marmakemis on page 1, al davar mutar levarech.
Put it on the screen, please.
Leil Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. She'isa, the Shail said he saw in the Sefer Chodosh the Shari. So he brings the Chidah that this Sefer Chodosh, who he doesn't name, approached the Shaila of whether or not the Nihugim of Yemei Bein HaMetzarim should begin B'Layla B'Yom as a general Shaila that whenever something is Tali on a Yom, does its din begin only on Yitzumah Shel Yom, or does it already begin B'Layla Shel Lefanav? That Shaila is discussed by a Kadmon, by the Baal Mutzal Me'esh, the Mari Alfandri, the Baal Mutzal Me'esh. So Baal Mutzal Me'esh discusses a Shaila unrelated to the dinim of Yemei Bein HaMetzarim, but a much more general Shaila. If someone makes a neder that he won't do something on a certain day, when does his neder go into effect? Does it depend on the Laila that we're usually accustomed to, the Laila of Din, which is Kol Dini HaTorah, which means it begins with the Laila Shel Lefanav, or when a neder is defined in terms of Yom, is it what we usually call the day, which usually means from the morning? That's the Shaila of the That's the shaila of the Mutzah Mayesh. The Mutzah Mayesh is copied opposite the Chaim Shal on the left top of the Maram Mekaymis. Yesh listapek im maskil nidra ishvosim in alaylo idafke min hayoim. And then he declares an additional shaila, which is not directly our shaila. Does it begin from Alois HaShachar, or does it begin from Yetz HaChama? Which that shaila is not directly relevant to our Inyan. It says, Omnom mitshuvas HaRashba shekosa v'zel shoynoi haleilois yichlelu bichlal yomim. Nights are included in the definition of a yom. Lefikoch mishenoda litin pruta b'chol yom. Someone who made a neder to give a pruta b'chol yom. Sorich litin bein bayoim or bein balayla. Now the simple reading of the Rashba is very difficult, because if we translate it, it means he has to give a pruta by night and by day, and that l'chara has no understanding. Because if he said he would give a pruta by yom each day, he only has to give one. He doesn't have to give one by day and by night. So the Mutzah Mayesh will come back to explain the Rashba, and essentially his explanation will be that if he made a neder to give a pruta each day, he could fulfill his neder even by night. He doesn't have to give the pruta dafka by daytime, from which the Mutzah Mayesh is going to deduce that according to the shita of the Rashba, the yom is the Laila is included in the yom. But let's see how the Mariel Fanji Firzais. He says in Matzosi l'Rava Godel Abamori v'zeh v'zeh l'shaynai. What does the Rashba mean? That because whenever we speak about Yom, it includes the preceding Laila. And someone who makes a neder to give a pruta each day, he should give the pruta right away. That's one explanation of the Rashba. The Rashba means to say he could give it at either time, so he says what we see from the Rashba, the Mishanoda lisanois oilifroya the chol olav achiyuv mitchilas halayla, that the chiyuv begins from the beginning of the day. And he says that seems to be the hepech hadin, that if someone says a koinam of yayin on the yoim, koinam yayin b'yoim zeh, the koinam already only takes effect at the beginning of daytime and doesn't include the laila. So memele zok the Mutzah Mayesh, we can be masupik. Maybe dafke b'tainis u'puroin the ein regilus aval kayotze b'nidin didan cholo issa b'tchilas halayla. The Mutzah Mayesh remains masupik what the klal is. He says the pashtus on the Rashba should be that b'stoma, whenever a person mentions yoim, it includes a laila shalafanov. But maybe there's certain instances where if the regilus is only to do something by yoim, then maybe if a person says yoim, it means only yoim. But the pashtus should be based on the Tshuvas Rashba that b'stoma isurim that are totally on a yoim, even if there is surim that achal beneder, not isurim that are mugder in dini atayra, it includes a laila shalafana because that's the basic hagdara of the yoim. In the lashon of the Rashba, leilos yichlelu bichlal hayom. Right? So of them, zok the Sefer Chodosh that the Chidah quotes, if you go back to the Chidah on the right-hand side top, he says, Rak le'inyan dina shekosav, deloy domi l'tshuvas Rashba shehevi meri al fanji, dehocha hatam, de beyudvov betamuz iru mili de puronisa, ve'ein lechaboy ela chidushoy, de mizmana puronus dafka, de beyoim yud zayin hufka ha'ir, the derech hamelochim lases melchama bayoim beherechos. So what is the Sefer Chodosh saying? The Sefer Chodosh's assumption is that the dinim of Yemei on Tzarim are totally on Yom, on dates. Zog the Rashba, whenever something is totally on Yom, unless we have a svara to say otherwise because it's in regilus, etc., leilos yichlelu b'chal hayom. So therefore, b'pshutai, if we wanted to define the zman of Yemei bein hamitzarim, we would say if it begins Yom Yud Zayin B'Tamuz, it begins Balayla Shalafon. But Zok the Sefer Chodosh that the Shoyal is presenting to the Chidah, a Svar Niflo. Avad it's totally on Yomim.
But there's a reason why that it starts on that Yom, and that's because of the Puranios that happened on that Yom. What's the Iker Puranus that begins Yemei Bein HaMetzarim? We said it today in Slichas, a mission in the Masechta Tainis. Hamisha Dvarim Iru B'Yom Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. The Iker is that B'Yom Yud Zayin B'Tammuz Huvka Ha'ir. So Zok the Shoyel to the Chidah Davar Nifla. When did Huvka Ha'ir happen? It happened in the daytime. In B'Yomim Ohim, there was no such thing as night warfare. It didn't exist. The Bekia of the ear was B'Yom. So Mimele Zok the Shoyel to the Pri Chodosh. The Svara of the Sefer Chodosh is even though the Svara Chitzoyna should be that Yemei Bein HaMetzarim of exactly Kishmoy Kainheim, that they should be defined by Yomim, in which case we have the Svara of the Rashbas, Maria Alfandri says, that the Kol Dinei HaTorah, even where it's not Befurish HaTorah, if it's Yomim dependent, it's Kol Delayla Shalafano, but here, Zil Basataima, or in the Lashon of the Shoyel, Ein Lecha B'Y Elech Yidushay. Since what begins Yemei Bein HaMetzarim is the Puranus on that Yom, so Mimele, even though of course we can't pinpoint the Zman in the Yom in which Huvka happened, but since it's Meshach Shaykh to the Yom, the Issa should only be Shaykh to the Yom. That's the Svara of the Shoyel. So we began by saying that Misvara, if the Nihugim of Bein HaMetzarim are not Toli on Tainus and Yom, then the Svara should be Toli Balayla, which the Maria Alfandri says, Api the Rashba, Zokt, however, the Shoyel to the Chidah, there's a Svara to say that since it's Toli on Puranus, the Puranus is Maschal by Yom. Now on that, the Chidah comes to argue, and he says the following, and here we have to pay careful attention to the Lashon of the Chidah to understand his Svara. In what point is he taking issue with the Shoyel? So he says like this, he says, Ani ba'oni oimer, da'af iyavinon kol delay. Meaning, even if we agree that it should depend on the period in which the Puranus began, namely the Yom, he says, this is a very basic, very fundamental Shitas Ramban in the Sugi of the Dalet Taniyos. Mishnah Berurah quotes it in the beginning of Hilchos Tainis. It's a Metafko from Tes based on the Shlach Kodesh. And it leads to the dinim of which we'll see Be'ez Hashem B'Hemshech of how a Baal Nefesh is noyeg on the Dalet Taniyos. He says, "Zelosheni umistavra the kulu Dalet Soymo is Tanis Tziburheim uneviim Gozru Oisam." All the 4 Taniyos, meaning not just Tisha B'Av, but Asar B'Teves, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, Tzim Gedalia, all have the chumrah of a Tanis Tzibur. The kol chumrei tainis aleim, namely mafsikim miboid yoim, you have to stop eating before shkia, the night into the tainis, or we would say you can't eat the night before. The asurim berechitza, and you can't wash, exactly the same as Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av. Ukromakishlu, the pasuk compares them. Zot the Ramban elo ha'idna bizmanenu, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah is mavur kibben dizman deleket tzara b'teilim. When there isn't intense tzaras from the Umas Ha'olam, so Mi'ikar Hadin, those Taniyos are not in effect, and the din is Rotsu Noagu Lisanis Behem, we only keep those Taniyos Bizmanenu als Mineg, not Mitzatakonas Hanavim, Mimele Veloy Rotsu Lineg Behem Berchumra Salalu. So when Klal Yisrael decided to continue the Mineg of all the Taniyos besides Tisha B'Av, they continued with a certain kulas. But he says, "Avami iker hatakonov vade asurim him bekulam, the legor exeres neviim exeres bezdin ein shom ba'orech, vehevi dvar v'haram perik hamad Rosh Hashanah." That's the isoid of the Ramban, which means the Ramban says, "Mitzad the etzim yom hataynis, all our yomim of taniyos really should be identical to Tisha B'Av. Just since we keep the tainis b'teres minig." So Mimela mitzad, what's called the nihugim of the tainis, the way the dinim that the tainis is mechayiv, we keep it with kulas. We're not mafsik mi by yoim, and we make radim we don't answer rechitza. The Shlach Kodesh says, which Mishnah Berurah brings down, that a Baal Nefesh lechatchila should be machmer to be noiheg on the Dalet Taniyos, on all Dalet Taniyos, the same as the chaymer of Tisha B'Av. As I state, the Mishnah Berurah says, we're not rechitz b'chamin. Now, Nilas HaSandal, we don't see even a Baal Nefesh being machmer on, because Nilas HaSandal, even on Tisha B'Av, or be going out in the Rosh Hashanah, one can wear min olim. So we don't even find the Baal Nefesh as machmer on min olim. But the point that the Chidah takes from that is that our Ta'aniyos, in a certain way, have a split din, you could say like that. Mitzad, the Yom itself, the full day is a day of kindness. And it should start from the Laila Shalafana. Just we're noyeg the kindness with certain kulas, and therefore, b'maise, we're oicha b'Laila Shalafana. And me'ikra din, we're roichet. And we are not noyeg the chumas. Zok there, the kevin the kindness you'd zayin betam was me'ikra takonas v'gezeres haneviyim. Choyol hafsik me'idyoyim kitisha ba'av. Mitzad the ikik zer of the kindness, it would start b'Laila Shalafana. Nihida hashta he kelu lecha b'Laila v'lirchoitz, even though bizman hazeh, we're makel to be eat balayla and to wash throughout the day. Mikomokim zman pur onusu. V'kachhoisa hatakono meikoro linoi b'tainis mi b'yom kitishabav. Umi'acha shekein l'mashe noagu shaloi l'mashe chiyonu v'adam etchilas lo yudzayin in lo mashe chiyonu. Now, we have two ways to understand what the Chidah is saying. Is the Chidah arguing entirely with the Svar of the Shoyal and saying the Shoyal assumed that it's totally on Yemei Bein HaMetzarim? Now we can discuss Yomim ordinarily begin Balayla, but since the Real Fanji says that whenever there's a svara to say that the Yom doesn't begin Balayla, we don't have to begin the Yom Balayla, like where there's no Regilos. So since the Yom is a Yom of Puranus, let's see when the Puranus began. The Puranus began by Yom. So to that, the Chidah might say Pasha, that's not what it depends on. It depends on the Yom HaTainis. And the Yom HaTainis begins Balayla. Even though we're not noyeg not to be oichel balayla, but the Yom HaTainis begins balayla. So what the Chidah is saying is that the same way as we see in the Ramban, that there are two dinim in the Tainis, there's the Yom HaTainis and the nihugim of the din HaTainis. So bismanenu we have a Yom HaTainis of Shiva Osa B'Tammuz, but the nihugim of the Yom HaTainis are kafir only the way we were makabel to do. So Me'ela Zot the Chidah, the Yom HaTainis begins Lel Yudzayin. And therefore, we could say that the Shoyal, the Sefer Chodosh, and the Chidah are arguing in this basic Shayla. Are the Nihugim of Yimei Bein HaMetzarim totally on Yomim, or are they totally on Tainis? However, I think if we medayek the Lashon of the Chidah, and this will be important when we see how the Achreinim on Eskashim, the Chidah, the Hemshech Beis Hashem, the Chidah doesn't say that. The Chidah doesn't simply say it's a Yom HaTainis. He says the following, for medayek his Lashon, almost towards the end. What's the Lashon? No. Zman Puranis. Excellent. The Chidah doesn't say simply that the Tainis begins Balayla, so there's a Bein HaMetzarim. He doesn't say that. He says, since we see that the Nevi'im were Kriveya, Yom Yud Zayin, as a Yom Tainis, by them being Kriveya Yom Tainis, that means they began Yom Yud Zayin Balayla. Why were they Masakin? That the Niug should begin already Balayla. If Lefi the Shoyal, the Huvko era was only by Yom. Al Korchoch, by being masakin a tainis on Yom Yud Zayin, which encompasses the Laila Shalafonov, in that takonas tainis Chazal, the Nevi'im were megale that this man is his man Purams. And if you look back in his Lashon at the beginning, he says, Afi Yavino, the Lashon of the Chidah was, Kol delay HaRav of HaRamban, which means the Chidah is saying Mefurish, we're accepting the Hanoch of the Shayal. We're accepting the hanocha that mitzad zman puronus, we start by Yom. But Zog the Chidah, I have a raya that even zman puronus begins balayla. Why? Because if the Nevi'im were masakin the tainis, which be'echrach begins balayla shalafonov, even though our nihugim are not like that, so we could say perhaps bismanenu we don't look at the zman puronus, look at the ikar takonas atainis. The ikar takonas atainis establishes that the entire Yom Yud Zayin from the Laila Shalafonov is this man of Purams. So in Tzenu Lemeidim, if we summarize what's Mavur in the Chidah and the Shoyal, Kulei Alma Moidi, that the basic assumption is that the Nihugim of the Yemei Bein HaMetzarim are totally on Yomim. The Machlokes is how to define when the Yom HaPuranos begins. Does it go by the Zman of Huvgoyer, or does it go by what the Nevi'im were Mesakin and their Takonas Tainis, that Yom HaPuranos already begins B'Laila Shalafam? Azay is Mavur in the Chaim Shah. So there is a sefer which is called Ikre Hadinim, or sometimes referred to by the Pesachim as Ikre Hadat. in the Shulchan Aruch, in the regular Shulchan Aruch, in the Vilna Shulchan Aruch, there's a sefer at the end that's printed at the end of Yeridea called Sefer Ikri Hadinim. The mechaber was Hatzoyer Daniel Tirani, who was mechan himself Hadat. He was a Chacham Sfardi, so das in the way that Sfardi should be to is dat. So he was writing Ikri Dinim, so he called it Ikri Hadat. In the Pesachim, it's very often quoted as Ikri Hadat. It's printed in Yeridea. It's printed in the end of the Shulchan Aruch, on the Vilna Shulchan Aruch. It's not in Orech Chaim. It's published as a separate sefer. So in the Ikri Hadat, he makes a cheshbon nifla to explain why Ledina, the Ledidan, the Chidah is not correct. And he says like this. He says that the Shaila of should the Nihugim of Yimei Bein HaMetzarim be dependent on Tainus Uzman, L'chorah should be able to be nifshat from a Pasha to Halacha. Go'inish Taina. He says like this. What happens when Shiva Asa B'Tammuz is Chal on Shabbos? So we're not Misana on Shabbos. When are we Misana? We're Misana on Yom Rishon. Now, when we don't make, we are noig like the Mechaber, like the Chidah said, not to make a Shechianu through Yimei Bein HaMetzarim. Now, there's a broad machlokes hapaiskim, which Mishnah Berurah brings. If on Shabbos you can make a Shechianu. The Magen Avraham brings that there was a machlokes between the Mekubalim, al pi the IYUNIM. The Shabbos changed the Metzius of the Yimei Bein HaMetzarim, so you can make a Shechianu Shabbos. Now, Zog the Magen Avraham, lefi the Machmirim, that you wouldn't make a Shechianu even on Shabbos. What about on the Shabbos of Shiva Asa B'Tammuz? Which could happen. Shiva Asa B'Tammuz can fall on Shabbos, and it's Nidcha to Sunday. In that case, even if you're going to be machmir and say that on a regular Shabbos during the Yimei Bein HaMetzarim you can't make a Shechianu, what about the Shabbos of Shiva Asa? Zog the Magen Avraham, even the Fida Mekubalim who are machmir, not to make a Shechianu on all the other Shabbos of Yimei Bein HaMetzarim, but Shabbos Shiva Asa B'Tammuz you can make a Shechianu. What's the svara? The answer is because the Tainus isn't noig that day. Zog the Ikar Adat, we should have a din mefurish. Here we have a case that the Ikar Adat had a go'inish hamtzah to find a case where mitzad the yoim, it's yoim yud zayin, and mitzad tainus, there's no din tainus. So and this is not just the Laila Shalafanov, this is the whole day. The Magen Avraham is makel to make a Shechianu anytime on Shabbos, not just Leil Shabbos, anytime. Zok the Ikra Hadat, that should be muchrach, that the dinim of the Yimei Bein HaMetzarim are totally not on Tainus, not on Yomim, I'm sorry, but are totally on Tainus. So Memele Zok the Ikra Hadat, Hare, the whole svara of the Chaim Shoal was, like we said, was that Yom Yud Zayin is a Yom of Puranus, because we see that that the din of Tainus was nikva on that Yom. Zok there, that's all if we're going to go Basa the Zman. But if we hold like the Magen Avraham, that on the Shabbos that Shiva Asa B'Tammuz is Chalon, you can make a brach of Shechianu. The reason is because we didn't begin the Tainus yet at all. Since we didn't begin the Tainus, there's nothing that starts the din of the Nihugim of Yimei Bein HaMetzarim. So the din of the Chidah should be tolui on the Machlokes HaMekubalim. Can one make a Shechianu on the Shabbos that Shiva Asa B'Tammuz falls out on? How do we know it? Zot the Ikra Hadat, we know it. The minig even of the Chachmei Yisrael was to be noig like the Magen Avraham. So Zok there lefi that we have a way to argue with the Chaim Shoal. The oifen that the Ikra Hadat is saying that the Magen Avraham is muchach that it's totally on Tainus, not on Yom. This is what he says. He says, "Umizeh din lomad gamkin gzeir shavos." The Ikra Hadat, the Chidah made a parallel. Geshem shem varchim shechiona b'Shabbos shechol b'Shiva Asa B'Tammuz afagav l'misane adayin. Hochenami mevarchim shechiona b'Leil Yud Zayin B'Tammuz afagav l'Yischilu B'Tainus klal adayin. The Laila Kiyoimoy Valach Shayach Layoim become B'Shabbos Gam Kenem Mevarchim. Zokterem can cause a lidi too. Aval l'shitza mogin avrom, sivkotin membeis the poisik lehedia. Afilu l'das hariach kodesh mechmish le'lebarach shechionu b'shabos shebein hamitzarim. Afilu ochi b'shabos shechol shiva asa b'tammuz hoyod lo isan adayin mevarchim shechionu. And as I state in Pri Megadim, the Machriya like that, the Eli Rab and the Bar Heitev, im ken hoder adin v'lo lidzayin b'tammuz nami mevarchim shechionu. Memele, dot the ikad hat. L'didan, this year, where it's not negea the shaila of Shabbos b'tammuz being chal on Shabbos. But now what we've established is that the Mogen Avrom is mavur, it depends on tainis. If it depends on tainis, and here the Ikra that goes a step further, which we'll see is not muchach necessarily. He says, if it depends on tainis, then when does tainis start? Tainis starts by Yom. Memele, if tainis starts by Yom, everything should be mutter, b'layla shalafonov. You can take a haircut, you can make a chasana, you can eat basar and yayin, even though ordinary, the those one know you're not to. It's totally on tainis. What's his raya? His raya is because Shabbos also is Yom Yud Zayin. What makes Shabbos different, even by Shabbos by day? Because l'maisa you're not being misana. If you're not being misana, so until you actually start being misana, so then it should be that everything should be mutter alive. Now we can obviously see that there's a mokum to be done in this hanocha of the Ikei Adat. Why? Because even if we'll say it's totally on tainis, but Shabbos, there's no Yom Tainis b'chlal. Shiva Osa b'Tammuz b'layla, now we can be done. What's the general din of a Laila Shalafonov? The Chidah said the Laila Shalafonov maybe doesn't have a Toiras Niuk Tainis, but it has a Toiras Yom Tainis. It's the Zman of Puranos. Now Yesh Lachkar, even if we accept the Raya Tsuma of the Ikri Adat, that b'mokum that there's no tainus on Yom Yud Zayin, there's none of the Nihugam Anoyek. What's that because of? Is it because there's no Nihug of tainus, there's no Isser Achila Shtia, etc. on Shabbos and Melas on it, or because there's not a Yom Tainus B'chlal? The nafkamina would be, how do we understand the Laila Shalafonov? Is that entirely not the Yom Tainus, or is it only that there's no Nihug of tainus? The Ramban that the Chidah brought is mashma that it's a Yom Tainis without the Nihugim of Tainis. Now Yesh Lodun, what is then Meichel, the dinim of Yimei Bein HaMitzarim? Do we need the actual Nihug of Tainis, or do we need enough Yom Tainis? The Ikre Adat makes a certain jump, and he says, if I see from Shabbos that since it's not a Yom Tainis, the Nihugim don't begin, so it's totally on Tainis, and Balayla you're not Misane. Now Yesh Lodum. So this Etzem Shaila is discussed by the Bali Gurs Moshe, by Moshe. And Moshe says the following. We'll begin now the Maramakomis on page 2 of the Maramakomis pages. And Moshe is done in this very Shaila. Moshe says like this: Nishalti mi yedidi hagoyim menachem polak zal b'shas tovshin yud shechol shiva osa b'tammuz b'yoyim aleph. Now, this wasn't Shiva Osa B'Tammuz Shenidcha, it was Shiva Osa B'Tammuz Fe'afelt on a Sunday.
On Sunday.
Yeah. Im yesh lasis nisuin belel moitzoi Shabbos kodesh or liyud zayin b'tammuz. Can we make a chasna on Motzei Shabbos? Now, we generally don't make chasnas on Motzei Shabbos. Kanir there was a tzorech. But he was asked, could you make a chasna on Motzei Shabbos or liyud zayin b'tammuz? Now, it's a fascinating thing to see later in the tshuva that Ramosha says that the situation of Shiva Osa B'Tammuz being Chal on Motzei Shabbos is unique, and we have no minute for that case. Now, the question is, what's special about Shiva Osa B'Tammuz being Chal on Motzei Shabbos? It's just any case of Shiva Osa B'Tammuz, can you make a chasna b'layla shalafonov? I didn't copy this on the Maramakomis, but I found what's special? I found years later, B'Siyata D'Shmaya, tshuva from Shmuel Bosna, which discusses this Igros Moshe. And B'Soich Dvarav he says that Yesh Mokum Lohokel B'Motzei Shabbos Ulai Mipnei Kedushas HaShabbos. Fascinating svar. And we'll see, Ramosha is meramis to this, but without a makar. But I saw Shmuel Vazna was argument on this mavucha.
Just for care.
What's special about this din? Mavur, there's some svar to be makel on Motzei Shabbos. Doesn't bring the makar, doesn't explain what. But as I state, it will be relevant as we proceed through the tshuva. But Zot Ramosha, the Hishavti, Ramosha paskins like the Ikri Adat, and he says, which is obviously the case because normally we're not knowing to make chasnas on Motzei Shabbos, different reasons brought in the Paiskim, but l'tzorech yesh lahatir. Why? Zot Moshe. Now let's see Moshe's clear. And he says, "Dilichura toli zeh b'machloikis harishonim im atainis maschil balayla v'oimrim anenu ba'oir hatainis dilabalamor tainis she'ein oimrim mishum shatainis maschil miboiker gam dine bein hamitzarim im maschilim elam ha'boiker." So Zot Moshe, this shaila of when a tainis tzibur, our Taniyas, what we call a tainis tzibur, begins. We saw Ramban, that the Ramban says that bisman that it was noig fully, it began balayla. Tisha B'Av was the same as every other time. The Ramban says bismanenu we make a balayla. Zot Moshe Chiddush Pella. The Ramban has a chaylik, and that's the Balamor. And the Balamor held that what we call Tainis Tzibur, namely Shivasa B'Tammuz, etc., none of them began balayla with the exception of Tisha B'Av. So we have Zot Moshe a Yesodistik and Machlokes Rishonim. That so far we kept discussing this shaila around the Ramban that the Chidor brought in Teres Adam. Zot Moshe, we have to know that there are Rishonim Achilik on that Ramban and Maninhu, the Balamor. That the Balamor in Tainis says that the Tainis of the Arba Tzemis besides Tisha B'Av never begins balayla. L'may nafkamina. The nafkamina is that we don't say anenu balayla either. There's no tzad to say anenu. So memele zok the Baligir Smaisha that if the tainis begins balayla or begins bayayim should depend on the machlokes Balamor and the Ramban. Dahainu, what do we see in Ramosha? Ramosha Avada is discussing Bizman Hazeh. And Bizman Hazeh, certainly we're not noyeg any nihugei tainis balayla. But Zot Moshe, according to the Ramban, the Yom HaTainis still begins balayla. Zok there, but we could be soymech on the Balamor and say that we have Shittas Rishonim that the tainis doesn't begin balayla. So what do we see in Ramosha? We see in Ramosha that Ramosha understood like the Ikrei Adat, that it's totally on tainis, but Ramosha says we can't just be maker like the Ikrei Adat and say that because b'metzias we're not being misanim, being noig dinei tainis until the yom, so mainly we don't have to be noig dinei bein hamitzarim until the yom. Zot Ramosha, I need more than that. I need to be able to find cholkim on the Ramban, because according to the Ramban, it's only noagu, and therefore we're not noig dinei tainis ikra din until the morning, but nonetheless the yom tainis is already balayla. Zot the Balamor. So the Moshe, look, we could be saying on the Balamor. Now, this is a Chiddush God Ladino, as we'll see. Because you can ask, you see we pass him like the Balamor. Why? We didn't say Anenu by Ma'ariv. When does the Shat start saying Anenu? The Shat says Anenu only by Shachris. What? Yeah, well, we'll get to that Be'ez Hashem. So that's a separate child why we don't say Tisha B'Av Anenu. But why don't we say Anenu on an ordinary leil tainis?
The Yom tainis thing.
Right? Why don't we say it by Yom? So the place can say a svara, and I apologize that this did not come out in the copies, but in the HILCHOS Taniyos, in the dinim of Amira of Anenu. So the
Yom tainis could be Yom.
Yeah. So the Mishnah Berurah says like this. Why don't we say it? He says, if you look in Shulchan Aruch, it says in Siman Tovkuf Samech. I apologize, it didn't come out in the copy. The Shulchan Aruch says, Ba'ar Batzoyimos, on the 4 Tzoyimos, Gama Yochid Oimer Bechol Tfiloisav. You should say it by Ma'ariv too. So the Mishnah Berurah, what does Kol Tfiloisav mean? Afilu B'Tfilas Arvis. Why? Zot the Mishnah Berurah, the etzem hatainis maschil mi ba'erev. Azal sprach of the Mishnah Berurah. Etzem hatainis maschil mi ba'erev. Zot the Sharat Zion. Ve'af shebegimel tainis rashai lecho balayla. Etzem hatainis starts balayla. We're eating. V'lo yitzrichu lahafsik mikol mokoim sheim tainis maschil mi ba'erev. How do I know? Because if you go to sleep without having in mind that you're going to wake up to eat before Alois, you're not allowed to eat. Zok the bir agro, and the Sharat Zion quotes it Vaistechois etzem atainis already starts balayla. Because if etzem atainis wouldn't start balayla, then how can there be an Isser Achila that could begin based on Yoshin? So Zok the Mishnah Berurah, don't make the mistake and say that from the fact that we don't say Anenu Balayla, that Vaistechois we hold that the Tainis only begins by Yom. Zok the Mishnah Berurah, etzem hatainis hischali ba'erev. We don't say Anenu because we don't say Anenu. We're not knowing like the Ramah says that we only say Hagon Nagu b'chalat tzaimis, which is what you were asking. What's the reason like that? Because Chas v'Shalom Yechazenu Bulmus will have to eat. Now, Mele, he shouldn't be a shotgun b'tfilas. That's why we're not knowing. But Me'ikar Adin, Zot the Mishnah Berurah, really the halacha we did in the Shulchan Aruch should be, we should say it by Ma'ariv too. If you're saying it by all the tefillas, you're saying it by Ma'ariv also. Etzem hatainis. And Zot the Bi'argo, the hechrich to that is because in Holach Yoshin and Lohe B'daite Lechel, it's a Kabbalah, and he's Nesa Balayla. So Ramosha is nochis to this, and Ramosha Avada is nochis to the svara that the Etzem hatainis begins Balayla. But Zot to Moshe, we have a Balamor. The Balamor is Cholik. The Balamor Etzem hatainis doesn't start Balayla. Now the obvious pell on Ramosha is, but in Shulchan Aruch steht nicht dabei. The Shulchan Aruch says that Me'ikar Adin Etzem hatainis begins Balayla. We're not saying on the Balamor. So let's see how Ramosha Bavarns this. He says, if you just skip down to after the brackets, he says, we can't be machriya between the Ramban and the Balamor. It's not a time of good simon to be able. Zok there, Efsher gam harif. Rashi, Ramban, Hasoibrim, the Tainis Maskal mi ba'erev, Yoidu shali inyan zehu rak mi hazman, shenikr shemisablim, shehuma aboiker shemaschil lisan. After the Kisvar. Zot Ramosha, in a chanami, mitzad yoim atainis, about it should start mi ba'erev, but maybe it's totally only on the Zman that the Zman Puronis is nikr, one Svar. But that doesn't need the Balamor. That's a svar. What do I need the Balamor for? It's got the gam levad zeh b'minig yesh leilach achar meiko. The gabi dinim of minig we could be saying on the Balamor. V'lochein yesh lahatzil l'tzayrech. Now Ramosha says, u'ba'oifen zeh shechol yudzayin b'tamas b'yem rishon shu davar she'eni motzu l'shayach lachkor ech noeg davar shalei motzu. And the obvious pella is that's just a general shayla how we noeg l'el shivas b'tamas. Why does it depend on how it fell out that year? So that Rosh Shmuel Vosna, as we mentioned, explains that maybe there's a tzad to be makel on Motzei Shabbos. That's Ramosha Svar. And Ramosha, this has been a get to Nisuin, and Ramosha repeats the Svar in two other places I know of. Maybe there's more. In Igros Moshe, he says again in Igros Moshe Narachaim Chele Gimel, and he says, Im chol b'motzei Shabbos, the fourth line of the tshuva, who toli b'machloikes harishayim shekosavti. The ikar heter, Moshe says, is we could be samech on the Balamor. The etzem hatainis doesn't start balayla. The sefer Chaim Shal sha'oisa loy mashechionu gam balayla ein etzli, and therefore he says ein lahachmer, avada ein lahachmer. No, so that Ramosha says twice that where Shiva Osav B'Tammuz is nidche, then be'ikah we're machmir to already consider Shiva Osav B'Tammuz as the beginning of Yimei Bein HaMetzar, which fits very well Ladina, because Ramosha is being oh no, I see what you're asking. I mean, you're asking that those two svaras should be a steer minei ubei according to the Ikar Hadat. And you're saying like this. You're saying if we're going to be machmir not like the Magen Avraham, so it means it's tali on Yomim. If it's tali on Yomim, then it should be back to the svara of the Chaim Shal. So for that we could have Ramosha's first svara that it's only from this man that's Nikah the Avelos. But you're asking very good, and this kasha bothered me very much, and I don't know a clear yishuv. That l'chura in svara it comes out that Ramosha says himself minei ubei l'chura, but the aim will be matched on Ramosha. Hare, we explained that Ramosha's entire mahalach is to decide when etzem atainis begins, and that's why he's somech on the Balamor. Even if you hold it is toli on etzem atainis and we're choishish to the Ramban, but maybe it should only be toli bizman that it's nikar, because that's when bnei adam are misanim. But then he says, like you said, b'yud zayin b'tammuz shechol b'shabbos, that's nidche, then avada you have to answer why. Mishum the dinim etzom cholu oid b'Shabbos. The yesh gam noyagim b'Shabbos. So if you hold it's noyagim b'Shabbos, that means it's not totally on the tainus. If it's not totally on the tainus, then so it seems to be that Ramosha is. I've thought to suggest, but I didn't find the Maramokim for this. That he's mitzaded lekan ulekan.
He's what?
He's mitzaded lekan ulekan. Says if you'll go basar yoyim atainis, then we're going to be saying on the balamor. If you want to go basar puranus, it's totally on the nihug of avelos, and the mela it's totally on when we start being nisana. In other words, the significance of starting being nisana isn't so much for tainis as much as for the beginning of the nihug of yemei bein hamitzarim. And Remailer, Moshe is mitzaded lekanu lekan, but it's not borrow. But it's not borrow. I did not find the Maramakim for this. Possibly, yeah. Right. That depends on the lomdus of a tainish and nidcha, which we once discussed in the previous limud. Lemaisa, it's meduktuk that Ramosha and all the following shuvas beikar is semech on the balamor, which he holds that beikar it's totally on the yom hatainis. And the difficulty is that each time Ramosha then repeats and says, but where Shivas of Tammuz is nidche, then avada then okus. No, it's still a tzarachian somewhat. It's not clear to me how to be yashav minei the svaras. But he says again, by haircuts also, in mutatispeiris balayla shaykh l'shivas of Tammuz. So he says, the mashav bi'arti lasis nisuin balayla hu b'machloikis arishonim. Meila l'tzarech yesh l'tzarech godli yesh l'hafir. Ramosha's mekel. So Nimtzeinu lemeidim that the central nekuda in this sugya is the tli of the Ikrei Hadat on the Mogen Avrom b'negei to Shechionu b'Shabbos. We're just being mechalik that even if it's toli on tainus, the Ikrei Hadat goes to say it should be toli b'mitzias when you're being misane. From Ramosha we see, and that should be the svara, that should be totally on the Yom HaTainus, not on the Niyog HaTainus. Just Ramosha has a svara that perhaps even those who hold the Yom HaTainus begins by Laila, if the Niyog HaTainus before doesn't begin, so therefore the Mesam Milsa and the Miktas Avelus doesn't begin until we start being Noeg. The Etzem Taina is in the Moedim Mizmanim in Ramosha Sternbuch in the last chelik of Moedim Mizmanim. It's copied on the bottom left of the page 2 of the Maramakomis. He says, "Agoyin Ramosha Feinstein Shlita beigris Moshe hirchik lahatir afilu nisuin gufa belel yudzayin the Tammuz." Ramosha wants to matter even a chasna la'is atzayrech umoichiach shebelel yudzayin b'Tammuz adayin lechal avelis mi bo'erev. Why the ha'o ein oimrim ozaneinu being semech on the balamar zot evdvar of tmuim the ha the ein minogeinu loymar ba'erev aneinu. Why don't we say on ba'erev aneinu loy mishum shleichal avelos elam epenesha balayla oichlim oid. It's only because at night we eat, so the nihugim of the tainis haven't begun. Now, Ramosha Sternbuch's taina is a little difficult to understand in the way he words it, because that's what Ramosha's hanocha is that it's not totally on Avelus, it's totally on penis. And the raya was the Ikrei Hadat's raya because b'Shabbos the dinim don't apply. So the Moedim Mizmanim says, true, the nihugim of Isra Achila don't start until Mi Ba'erev, but the Avelus certainly starts Balayla. But that Moshe's Gufid arguing with and saying that it's totally only on Yimei HaTainis. So the emes is Ramosha Sternbuch behemshech a little bit clarifies what he says, and he explains the Rambam in HILCHOS Taniyos in the end of Perek Yud Aleph explains that the purpose of it, what defines a Yom HaTainis, is a Yom of Tshuva, a Yom to be oinen v'doyeg al chatov. The Rambam repeats that lashon again by Arichas in the beginning of Perek Hey HILCHOS Tshuva, that we should be mizboinen b'chatoinu b'chatei aviseinu shechatoim b'chatoinu gormim all the tzaras. The Rambam is magdir that the Yemei Tainis are Yemei Tshuva. It's very fascinating. Tshuva's Chasam Sofer today to mention just Derech Hagav. But the Chasam Sofer says that applies according to other Rishonim, the Ran and others. He said that applies only on Asar B'Tevis and Sem Gedal and Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. But Tisha B'Av is a Yom of Avelus, not a Yom of Tshuva. And that he proves that from a Ram, the Loika Harambam, and he says, what's the Raya? The Raya is because we don't say Slichos on Tisha B'Av. We only say Slichos on the other three Taniyos, but we don't say on Tisha B'Av. Vaisdecha is the other 3 Taniyos we say Slichas because it's Yimei Tshuva. Tisha B'Av, the Ikroi is a Yom Avelos. Not that there isn't an Indian to be Shabbat also, but the Ikra Yom is a Yom Avelos. Chazon Zayin says the machlokes between the Ran and the Rambam, but you get to the Mahus HaYom of Yom Tisha B'Av.
Some cipher?
But the Yisod Advarim is Zotmoyedim is one of when we speak about Yom Tainus, even if we're not knowing Yom Tainus, but Yom Tainus is a Yom of Tshuva. The Yom Tshuva of Yom Tainus is like any Moyed. Just let's Tshuva Chas V'Shalom. Like any Moyed begins Balayla, the Moyed of Tainus begins Balayla too. That's what Ramesh Sternbuch is Mavur Behemshech. So essentially, if we ma'ayin in Ramesh Sternbuch in this whole Arichas Dvarav, he doesn't mean Avelos literally. He means that since the Yoim was Nikva as a Yoim of the Niyug of to be Ma'oinin al Chatov, Memela Vada that begins already Balayla. All the Avodah of the Yom HaTainis that the Rambam is Magdir, Avada begins Balayla, and therefore the
Maybe the tshuva begins during the day. Maybe the tshuva only begins during the day.
So that's the tshuva of the
Chayv Shalir is only during the day. It's not enough to be Deicha.
Yeah. So generally, this is a chiluk between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. My Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, in his Ksavim and in his Hirois was that was not willing to be Mekel. The Lel Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, and in the Archas Halacha and in Halicha Shlomo it brings from a Rebbe Neben Sal Shlita that he says B'Shem Rabbeinu, he says V'hoyel v'dinei bein hamitzarim aschilim kvar balayla l'chein ein lahater af b'shas adchak. The stomach is Chakimah Eretz Yisrael, the Chidah, etc. All held that the dinim of Avelos were noig even balayla, and therefore Ramesh was never willing to be Mekel. That's with the HaRav that we were roggled to hear. Mishmai. One brief nafkamina, well, that will end the Chelek Halacha of this year, and that is, what about Nihuge Avelos in the Bein HaShmoshos going into Yudzayin B'Tammuz? Now, by Tisha B'Av, Bein HaShmoshos is already knowing all the Dinei HaTainis. That's called the din of Mafsikim Ba'oid Yom. We finish the Sugan of Seconds, and when it comes a couple of minutes before Shkia, Bein HaShmoshos is already also like Yom HaKippurim. It's a Sugan in Mokum Shanoagim Psachim. Now, we could clear like this: if we're being choishish, and even Ramosha's nochis that meikra din we're choishish to the Shita Ramban, just we can be soymich on the Balamor, but Mokum Matzayah. The Fidder Ramban. The Yom HaTainis, not the Nihugim, but the Yom HaTainis is like Tisha B'Av and Yom HaKippur. The Yom HaTainis is already Meshach Shaykhi to Bein HaShmoshos. That's the Chomer of Mafsikim Ibad Yom. So even though Avadu Ba'oichel Kol HaLayla, but the Etzem Yom HaTainis should begin Bein HaShmoshos. So Kum the Chois should we be Moisif now an additional din that even the Bein HaShmoshos going into Leil Yudzayin B'Tammuz should be awesome. This Shaila gets asked, Kimat without fail every year. We'll call the Rav from the barbershop. The line is very long. I realize it's after Shkia already. So can I before 72? Can I the Shaila that's asked without fail each year? It's not a Zaltan Shaila. It's a Pele, and this Adar Abadayim should Adar seek more Maramakimis. The Maramakimis I know about it is the Buchach Rav in Eshel Avram. Is machmer on the Bein HaShmoshos into Yudzayin B'Tammuz. Machmer. Without Kedarkei didn't posuk, without an Arichas and Tam, perhaps the Svaras Hadvarim is that, like Rav Shlomo Zalman says, Ongenum is like the Chidol Dimei, that already this man is Noig Balayla. The basis of that is Shita Saramban of Yom HaTainis. So the din is Mepsikim Ibad Yom.
The Rav told me that you made the chuppah before the Shkia last night, so you were machmal there to the future. That's totally in this thing.
Yes, totally on this. So the Asher we'll just finish with the lotion of the Buchacha. He says Ach bechumra shel elisa noshim bein hamitzarim ulay bechlala gam bein hashmashos v'toiv lahaktim she hayichud kredim bein hashmashos heiter. That the Gemara of the Chuppah should be before bein hashmashos. So this is the maskana of the Buchacha Rav. So in addition to the fact that we have from the Buchacha Rav the chumra bein hashmashos, obviously included in that is the Hanocha Pshuta of the Buchacha Rav, that one isn't nice and Isha Balayla into Shiva Osa B'Tammuz, like the Chaim Shoal and those Achreinim.
Only that. Yeah. The minhag of Nesias Nashim. Yeah, that which is the ikadin that's brought to Shulchan Aruch. Where? Yeah. He was in the camp. He was in camp. Yeah. I'm not sure if you've ever seen.
How do you know when he wrote?
I'm not sure if you've ever seen. But
you don't have the date on this.
But my Shlita and all my Staten Island. My Rechami described to me the scene that Ramesha after Shachris would put on his sleep clothing, which is lighter because of the heat. Put on his dad canvas over, and he would sit me boikiv ad erev right to Chiddush Torah with a sefer in front of him. So he saw the magnifying glass and his notebook, and that was not even a Gemara.
So you wanted to donate more sperm
he had none. He didn't even go get them. He sat in boikiv ad erev.
But there
that
was
famous
sperm.
picture is a time warp. It's all of those who had the chus in that era to be with the Ramesh and the Summer all have this memory and etched in there.
Because he had it all in his head by heart.
Chiddush Torah, I was filling notebooks with the safer in front of him. So, yeah. When we begin the tkufa of Yimei Ben HaMetzarim, as you mentioned, so one of the inyonim that we often tend to overlook because it happens to be after Hilchos Tisha B'Av, but it's really roy for a chazara and an iyun, is Siman Tov Kuf Samach in Shulchan Aruch of Lasi Zeichel HaChurban. Even though many of these inyonim are tali on minig, and really the ikar of what we're mekayim bismanenu is the kriya is the next Siman of Tov Kuf Samach Aleph, the din of Roya Ar Yerushalayim, the Mikdash B'Churbanon, the din of kriya and the psukim that one says. But one of the minhagim is a gzeira sugi in the end of Mesechus Saita. Gozru ala Torah's chasanim shelo naniach klal. We are geyser not to put in a Torah on the Rosh Hashanah. The Makar Advarim the Gemara brings, it's based on the Lashon Chavez Lashon Rambam Shnema Haser HaMitznefes v'Horeim HaTorah. Haser HaMitznefes v'Horeim HaTorah. So when Klal Yisrael is neifel from the Gedula and the Goyle, so they remove a mitznefes, they remove an atar. It's the reason why we don't remove a mitznefes of a kala. That's a different reason. Like this ganal bailo, but the takana remain that for chasanim they remove their atars. In Yerushalmi, in the end of Saita, Yerushalmi brings a different pasuk. Yerushalmi's pasuk is, in a way, a much more familiar pasuk, where the pasuk in the end of came out to the end of Megillah Seicha, nofla ateres reishenu oina lanu ki chatanu. The Torah of the Rosh has fallen off. What does this Torah refer to? What's that Torah? There's a kama v'kama shitas in the Rishonim, in the Pashtanim Rishonim. But the number of Kadmonim bring from the Zohar HaKadosh that Nofla Teres Rishenu is the Shechina HaKadosh. Nofla Teres Rishenu. Eishes Chayil Ateres Bala, Kiviyochel. The Eishes Chayil Ateres Bala is the Shechina HaKadosha, which is Ateres Bala. It's called in Torah, and the Shechina HaKadosha was Nafla. Hisnari may offer kumi, like we say by Lechadoili, that we make him in the lashon of we make him Shechinta me'afra. The Ateres Reishenu, the Torah that's Al Gabi Reishenu, the Shechina HaKadosha, is Nafla. The pasuk says that. The lashon of the pasuk is v'yis ateres tiferes b'yad Hashem. That the Rebbeinu Shalom will be machzir the tiferes of Klal Yisrael. That's called the Rebbeinu Shalom will be machzir that Torah, which means Shechina will be sheikhin b'sechein. We're familiar with the lashon of the bracha of Kiddush Levana. That Klal Yisrael asidim to be ateres tiferes la'amusei botem. She'em asidim l'schadash k'moisa. Based on that pasuk of Yisa Teres Tiferes B'Yad Hashem, that Klal Yisrael are osir to be chayzer Yisa Teres Tiferes. That Klal Yisrael will be zeicha once again to be able to carry, so to speak, and therefore be an atara kibiyochel for the Rebbeinu Shem in the lashon of the Shir Yichud umosol loy itra atara. That kibiyochel we are ma'ater the Rebbeinu Shalom, and kibiyochel the Rebbeinu Shem is ma'ater us oiter Yisrael b'sifara. V'Yisa Teres Tiferes B'Yad Hashem.
Kiviyachol Klal Yisrael will be in Torah for the Rebbeinu Shem, and Hashem and Hu Adin, it will be choizer the Atorah to Klal Yisrael. Shechina Kadosha will be choizer to be shared with Klal Yisrael, and that Avada will be Kvoida Yisbarach, that will be Nizgala. That's the concept of Atorah. Memela Zot Yerushalmi Nofla Ateres Risheinu is the Makor for being Mevatel Atorah Shel Chasanim. Nofla Ateres Risheinu. Kiviyachol the Shechina Kadosha, which is Atorah Mal Gaber Risheinu, was Neifel. Avada, that's not the steer to the Risheinu that I'm a Farish at the Ikka that's referring to Beis HaMikdash, because Avada, the Ikka Makam Ashras Hashchina was in Mikdash. So that's what we have. Yisa Teres Teferes B'Yad Hashem. We have Teres Teferes Lamusei Boten, Umasaloi Itra Torah, Ishes Chayla Teres Vailo. We form Kiviyachol on Torah for the Rebbeinu Shalom, and Kiviyachol the Rebbeinu Shalom is Oiter As Miloshan Oiter Yisrael B'Sifar. What's Nirmaz in the fact that we lost the Atorah? So we'll begin with the Dover Pele, and it's of the Dvarim Atmuim that we don't find that the Kadmoidim are Movar Lehedya. That when it comes to Atifa of Tzitzis, we're Misativ Katifas HaYishme'elim. So it's based on the Gemara and the Nachat. Misativ Katifas HaYishme'elim, Machlokes Rishonim exactly what that means. The Goinim. Misativ Katifas HaYishme'elim. I once heard from Moshe Shapiro to ask, why it's true that we use Atifas Yishmael as an illustration, but Lashon Chazal needs a beer. Why are the Yishmaelim mentioned over here in the context of Atifas Tzitzis? So I once saw a Dover Nifla in a Sefer Zikaron. Sefer Zikaron was for an Adam Yokar in Atlanta. Greater Talmud Chacham was knowing about Tznei Aleches. It should be Sois of Yehuda Veis Bekever. His name is Ramosha Ezra, Talmud Chacham Muflog, who lived about Tznei in Atlanta. And recently published some of his Ksavim in a Sefer Zikaron, and he suggests the beer for this, which l'chura is Mamish Nikarim Divrei Emes. What the Indian of Atifas Yishmael means. It says like this.
Who are you quoting?
This is from a Sefer Zikaron that was.
Remember, who are you quoting?
Ramosha Ezra.
No, who is he quoting?
He's saying of his own. He's been
his own?
And it's based on Rishain. He says like this. The mitzvah of tzitzis we were zeicha to because Avraham Avinu said the Malchut Melech Shalom ki im yichut va'ad sreich now. For a sreich now we were zeicha to tefillin, keshesh tefillin. That's why tefillin is b'smoil. That's how we tie our shoelaces the left foot first. And benegea to tzitzis we were zeicha to from chut. What chut? What's a chut? Sreich now we understand. Sreich now is a shoelace, sandal strap. What's a chut? What chut? If one's ma'ayin in the Chizkuni Afanat, the Chizkuni says it's a chut that they put around the rosh. It says the derech of the Bnei Haaretz he was to put a chut around the rosh. I think in Arabic it's called the rope that goes around the kefir. If you ever look at how an Arab wears on top of the atifa, they wear a chut around. It goes on top. Sagt der Azoi, mevur in the Chizkuni, that when he said ki im chut vad sreichnal, he was saying two things. I don't want the sreichnal, I don't want the shoes, I don't want the parnasa, I don't want your gedula either. I don't want the atar on the rosh. That's what he was saying. And it's Kimat Mavur in the Chizkuni. He didn't want to take from Malki Tzedek two things. Not the bracha gashmis, that's nirmaz in the nalayim, and not the atar of the rosh. Not the gedula, and not the gedula in Momen, and not the gedula in Barak. The chut that he didn't take was from the chut that goes on the rosh of the umois of that zman. Mitzvah tzitzis we were zeicha to b'schus chut. That's the chut, that's ala rosh. What we're roim as in Atifas HaYishmaelim is that Adarabah, Klal Yisrael's whole gedula doesn't come from the Umas Ha'olam, is keneged the Umas Ha'olam. We have our own Atorah l'Reisheinu, right? We have an Atorah in the Reish of Atalis too. To be roimez to that Indian. That's why Atifas HaYishmaelim. We're being roimez that we were zoiche to tzitzis b'koyach that Avraham didn't take in chut v'atzrich now. The oimek of the Indian is Mavur Chizkuni that he didn't take the chut means the gedula of the Atorah Sheberoshim. Atorah Sheberoshim is roimez to a gedula. Adarabba, by not taking it, Klal Yisrael was zoichet to their own oifen of Gedula. When we speak about Nofla Ateres Reishein, we said there's two things. It's in this battle, the Gedulot Yisbarach. There isn't a Makom Fasharas Hashchina. And who adin Nofla Ateres Reishein means it's Neufel, the Gedula of Klal Yisrael. Our Atara is Neufel. What does it mean Atara is Neufel? That means the Gedula that we have, the Umas Oilam. Of Kiyami Chut V'Atzreich now, our Gedula is Eigene Gedula. Adarabba Kiyami Chut V'Atzreich now, we have our own Atifas Aroish, that's Roimus to our Gedula. That is the Keneged of Atifas Yishmaelim. That was Neufel. Memele Gozru Al Atara Shal Chasam. We were goizer that we have to be murdered, like the Lashon of the Gemara is. Hoser Hamitz Nefetz Haram Atara. We take a lost that Gedula. Part of the Hashpala is that Umas Oilam, we lost that Gedula. We don't have that same Atorah l'Reisheinu that we had. That's what's near us in the pasuk. Nofla Ateres Reisheinu. That's how we rhyme. Is Gozru al Ateres Chasanim. The limud from this is when I get to the beginning of the Yimei Bein HaMetzarim, is that we mentioned that we tend to sometimes overlook the next simon after Hilchos Tisha B'Av, how much Chachomim put in the Fimin Hagam, Protim and Pirtei Protim of Inyanim that are noyeg to maintain the Zecher of the Zecher of Churban, to be mechasef from a Suda of V'chulei. A Chazal wanted the person to be constantly aware of how there is this Metzias which is called Hotzar Mitznefes Haramah Torah. The ordinary Metzias of Klal Yisrael should walk with a gaiva of Oita Yisrael B'Sifara, with a gaiva, the Adarabba, Ki Michut V'Atzreich now. Nishnas and Dafnish unkommen to Zeir Gedula, we have our own, our Atifas, K'Atifas HaYishmaelim, Ki Michut V'Atzreich now. You can keep the Atara, that's the Reisheinu, because Klal Yisrael has their own Gedula. Zot the Gemara Seif Tainis, Mistarim Yesh Like Mokim Yesh Like HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Mistarim Shnoi. That's the oimik of Nofla Ateres Reisheinu. The mokum that we should have the full Atara. The Nochrim Mekarken Beicholi still walk with a kefir that has an Atara L'Reishon. That's the oimik of the tzara that we have. The idea that the Malchi Umas Oilam can have an Atara L'Reishon, but we don't have a Melech that has an Atara L'Reishon. It's all part of the oimik of the Avelos. This is something perhaps to be misbeinen. This musig of Nofla Ateres Reisheinu, that we're not zoich anymore to be megala. The Ishes Chayil Ateres Bailav Shchina, and either Gisa it's choset to us that Vayis Ateres Teferes B'Yad Hashem Oiti Yisrael B'Sifara.